Alright, now for the build triggers tab. Now, the first thing is trigger builds remotely, as you can see from, for example, from scripts. Now, if you can see here, this option, if you would like to trigger new build by accessing a special predefined URL, convenient for scripts actually. So for bash script, PowerShell or whatever. Now one typical example for this feature would like to trigger new build from the source control systems hook script. When somebody has just committed a change into a repository or from script that parse your source control email notification or whatever. Now here you can see, if I click on it, you can see that use the following URL to trigger build remotely, which is the Jenkins URL, the one I used, job, test job, the name of the job, build, and here we use the token and token name, which is the one we have it here, or /build with parameter token equal token name, the one we will provide here. Optionally append cause to provide the text that will be included in the recorded build cause. Okay, TTT for example, and I saved. I can build, or I can trigger this build actually using any shell script or bash script, PowerShell, but it must has access on this job as a user, and this is something we will handle in the security section, don't worry. Okay, so far so good. All right, now here the build after other projects are built. So if I click here, actually this is the something that will replace the pipeline use. So you can just create whatever freestyle jobs, which is the something we created, that is job, and then create this option. So here you can provide the project you want. So trigger only if build is stable, trigger even if the build is unstable, or trigger even if the build fails. Now this build, which means after other projects are built. So for now, let's create another test job. I will name it test job 2_2. Well, this is something very simple. Now if you can see that, because I already have job, you can see that we have this option, which is the copy from, if you want to create a new item from other existing. So if I click on here and I put test job, as you can see, I can just copy and paste every detail or every configuration I have on the test job and put it on the test job 2. Okay, so it is something like the copy clone from the test job. Okay, so let's okay, because actually we did it doesn't matter. As you can see, this is the test description, which is the something on the test job 1 or the test job. You can see that we just copy and paste the test job. It's okay, let's continue here. So if I click on build after other projects are built, now this is test job 2. So if I type test like this, now you can see that no such T, did you mean test? Now this is something actually bug with Jenkins. It must be solved actually, but I don't know why this happened. So make sure you don't have any white spaces and don't have any commas or lista. Now just click on this job, as you can see, without white spaces and without lista or comma. Okay, so like this actually, test job, trigger only if the build is stable, trigger even if the build is unstable, or trigger. Now I will put on the trigger only if the build is stable, and I will save it. So if I trigger job 1, for example, like this, from here you can see that we have the build from here. If I trigger build 1, so if I click on it, you can see that we have a downstream project, which means that this job 2, it will run if this job is executed successfully. So this job 1 executed, yes. So if I run it, let's run it again. Yeah, you can see that it is 9 now, which means it has been run. Now ignore for now, it is empty, we don't have anything. Ignore it for now, please, but just keep in your mind the main idea. All right, so if I click on the downstream, which is the test job 2, we can see that we have an upstream project. So for the test job 2, the upstream is test job, and for test job, this one, which is test job 1, I mean, the downstream will be test job 2. Okay, so this is something like the pipeline. All right, so you replace the pipeline, the Jenkins file script, or without writing any script or whatever, we can just use the simple jobs or the freestyle jobs and then enable this feature, which is the build after other projects are built. Now again, I already mentioned that from the general here, if you click on advanced, now as I told you, so you can see that block build when upstream project is building, or block build when downstream project is building. So here for this job 2, the upstream is this job, right? So I can click on this. So block build when upstream project is building. So I cannot run this job 2 until this job is complete. So if it is running, I cannot run this job 2 no matter what. So I can click on this. So which means that this job 2 will be blocked until this job 1 or this job is completed. All right. Okay. So far so good. Let's return back here. So this is the build after other projects are built, which is something very useful. Now here we can see that we have the build periodically. So if I click on it, you can see that this is something you can put your cron tab here or your cron scheduler, just copy and paste or write it here, then you can run whatever you want. So if I click on, if I put an example, you can see that, do you mean every minute? When you say this, perhaps you meant H, to boil once every hour. So here you can just provide the cron tab you want. So you want this job to run every hour, to run every minute, to run once a week, once a month, and so on. Just a cron tab. I assume that you are familiar with. Now here you have the GitHub hook trigger for get SCM polling. Okay. Now this is something we talked about actually. So as you can see, if Jenkins will receive a push GitHub hook from repo defined in get SCM section, as you can see, the get SCM section, which is something we already have here, which is the get from the source code management, the SCM. All right, it will trigger get SCM polling logic. So polling logic in fact belongs to get SCM, which is the get here from the, as you can see, from the core source code management. All right, so this means that if I click it like this, so for this get repo I provide for this specific branch, if any event happened, push, pull, clone, or whatever, commit, or whatever, then I will trigger this job. All right, depends on the specific events. All right, so far so good. Now you may ask me, but how should I configure that? Well, actually you need to configure that on the GitHub account. This is something from the settings on the repo, on the specific repo. From the settings, you will find something called hooks, and then you will set up it there. Okay, by providing, of course, by providing the IP address or the Jenkins URL or IP or public IP. Okay, but it must be a public. Now again, you can ask me, but I don't need my Jenkins to be public, I need it to be private. You can use a forwarder server, and then you forward only the traffic from GitHub to Jenkins. So by this, you ensure that you have your Jenkins secure, and you cannot access Jenkins unless you use a VPN server. If you have the VPN credential, then you are allowed to access the private Jenkins, and so on. Okay, but actually I will not talk about the GitHub hook trigger here in this lecture exactly. We will talk about it later on, don't worry. Okay, now let's talk about the poll SCM. Now if I click on here you can configure Jenkins to poll changes in SCM. So here the note is going to be expensive operation for CVS, as every polling requires Jenkins to scan the entire workspace and verify it with the server. So consider setting up a push trigger to avoid this overhead as described in this documentation. You can read it. Now actually the poll request, you can see you will put a scheduler. So you will make sure that for the SCM you provide here, you will make sure that you have the latest code every 1 minute, every 1 hour, of course not 1 minute, let's say every 1 week, or let's every 3 hours, every 12 hours, 24 hours, or whatever, depends on what your needs. Okay, so here you can see that we have this option, actually ignore post commit hooks as well. So you can see that you can ignore changes notified by SCM post-commit hooks. Alright, so far so good. Now in the next lecture, we will start handling the build environment.